Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us, may he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We're reading from the complete works of Swami Ramakrishnananda, the chapter called Give God His Throne. And I'm going to start partway back in the previous paragraph. Otherwise, the first word in the next paragraph won't refer to anything. When a man disentangles himself from the gross body, when he disentangles himself from the subtle body, and when he disentangles himself from the causal body, then only can he realize his true nature. And then he finds that he is pure existence, consciousness, and all blissfulness. All these are one and the same. They are not three different entities. When the idea of existence is there is consciousness. And because you love to exist, so the idea of happiness or bliss is also there. One cannot remain without the other two. And indeed, peace, love, and freedom, Sat Chidananda, existence, consciousness, bliss, however you want, infinite, undivided, and unchanging, however you want to describe Brahman, it's not really three things. It's just that we have to think of it in terms of different things because it's infinite. And so in order to get any kind of a grasp, sort of like triangulation, when you're trying to find somebody that's lost, you have to triangulate their position. So we have to sort of triangulate God's position out there somewhere by using these three ideas, but they're not really three. So similarly, when we talk about the different yogas and how they can lead to one or the other of those qualities, we find that once you've achieved that, you've gotten the whole thing. You don't have to do one yoga to achieve undividedness or bliss, and another one to achieve freedom or the infinite, and so forth. Once you've achieved it, and you've got all of them. All right, so this is the this. This can only be realized by a man who goes beyond all limitations. Man is not really so fragile, so weak, as he imagines himself to be. But for this little machine of a body, the universe would not exist. But for man, there would be no universe. A sleeping man looks a dead body, but the man is inside. Still, it is a fact that the legs cannot walk, the eyes cannot see, the ears cannot hear. But although he may not be in the legs, he may not be in the eyes or in the ears, yet he is there somewhere inside the body. This kind of brings up that quantum physics dilemma, because we now have the idea that the wave function collapses when an observer observes it. But what observer has to observe it? And of course, as Schrödinger says, there's no hard evidence for the plurality of the observers. There's really only one of us here. We're the stupid ones that think there are a lot of us. But does that not also go for the cats and the dogs and the frogs and the trees and the birds and the bees? Are they not also conscious entities? And so would the universe not exist, and would quantum physics not be going on if there is anything alive that was conscious in that sense? All right, so let's see. Now I'll preface this a little bit. This is going to be really going into the bhakti path, which of course Swami Vivekananda talked about all the different yogas, but in the West he tended to talk a lot about Advaita Vedanta, and he talked about a lot about strength and believing in yourself and so forth. And this particular approach that he's going to start with here is a bit on the opposite end of the spectrum. And even though it is the devotional path, you can have a devotional path that's not devoid of thinking of yourself as being strong. So we'll talk about that later. All right, but although he may not be in the legs, he's not in the eyes or the ears, yet he is somewhere inside the body. Nevertheless, while he is sleeping, his wife may be lying by his side, but he is forced to forget his wife, and not only his wife, but the whole universe, his whole body, and his mind even. Then, that he has gone away from all the indriyas, meaning the sense organs and the organs of action, is a palatable fact, for he does not see, hear, act, or remember. Thinking, feeling, and memory are the functions of the mind. Seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching are the functions of the sense organs. Walking, talking, working with the hands are the functions of the organs of actions. But since he does not think, feel, or remember, see, hear, taste, touch, or smell, or act, it is evident that he has gone away from all the indriyas, and not only from them, he has gone away from the very memory of the universe. When he is awake, he can remember, though he may not think or see or act. When he falls asleep, however, he no longer even remembers. Only when the man comes back to his mind, he begins to remember the universe. When he comes back to his senses, he begins to perceive the universe. And when he comes back to the body, he begins to move about and act. The universe was there when he was sleeping, but only when the man lives in his senses and his mind can the universe exist for him. And if he does not exist in his mind and senses, not only the universe, but the memory of it does not exist for him. Thus we see that this machine of the body and the mind is the most wonderful thing in the entire creation, for it is the prop on which the whole universe is resting. Well, as I said, I think probably any conscious being is supporting this universe in some sense. Days and months are passing away, summer and winter are passing away. Still, man thinks that he will live forever and is building all sorts of airy castles. So our philosophers say there is no knowing when death may overtake us. This life then must be very precarious, and if this life and body are so precarious, how much more uncertain must be that which is resting on this body. How precarious, therefore, is this universe, which is based on the body. What constitutes the universe? Spouse, children, wealth, name, fame. These make up the universe of nearly everybody. But you must go out of your body every 12 hours involuntarily, for you are driven out by sleep. This shows that you do not really own this body. If you did, you could do what you pleased with it. As a matter of fact, however, this body has not come to you out of your own choice. For if you had selected your own body, would you not have taken one that was beautiful and healthy and to your liking? Well, actually, when you read the accounts of people, kids that remember their past lives and people that have near-death experiences and so forth, apparently there is some choice that people have in what kind of things they're going to, how they're going to incarnate, some choice of parents, some choice of talent, some choice of their of how they want to work out their karma, how much of their karma they want to take on in this one particular lifetime. We can't unravel everything in one lifetime usually, unless you've been working at it for a very long time. So apparently there is some choice, but obviously it's within certain parameters. You can't always choose a luxurious life where you're the most brilliant person and the most beautiful person and the healthiest person that lives a long, healthy life. You don't have those kinds of choices. But according to the reports, people say that they have a much higher understanding of what's going on, and so they are able to take on the difficult lessons. It's like signing up for courses at a university. You know they're going to be tough courses, but you know you want to sign up for them anyway. And so it's something like that. So we have apparently some say in the matter, but you can't have everything all in one lifetime and for every lifetime over and over again. That is certainly true. All right, so his point is that we're not really in control, and he's going to go on like this for some time. He is then then if you have not been able to choose the body, must have been given you by someone else. And who is that? God. He is then the proprietor of this body. It belongs to that power which moves us, whichever way it wills, without regard to our choice. None can gainsay that power. He is irresistible. Having a body which I cannot call my own, having an egoism which is a slave to that power, for I have not my will against it. When I thus study my environment and my own conditions, I see that I am not free. Every creature is bound hand and foot. None can withstand that power. And in some sense, it's our karma that has bound us to this, and this sense of ego. It's our genetic program that gives us our ego. And so we're essentially a slave to the genetic programming. We're born into a genetic organism, and the genetic organism has its desires. It's programmed to want to do things. It wants to drink when it's thirsty and eat when it's hungry and sleep when it's sleepy and so forth. So we are definitely slaves to our genes, you could say. And in some sense, we're somewhat of a slave to our karmic past that we have to pay certain debts to and learn certain lessons about. So this is the condition that we are in. And so, as I said, this is leading up to the devotional approach where you resign yourself completely to the Lord. And of course, as long as we have a little ego rather than the ego of the Supreme Self, with a capital S, this is the safest way to go. Because it's the little s that we tend to identify with, and we have to realize that little self is powerless, and we need this devotional approach to further our spiritual progress. Then what are we to do? I resent it if one calls me a slave, and I retort, "Your father is a slave." Yet, when I look at myself, I cannot deny that. Although I do not like slavery, still I am a slave. Then what must we do? Our greatest struggle must be to get out of this slavery. To do this, there are two ways. One is we can make friends with that power. He is so vast that he says of himself in the Gita, quote, "Only on one portion of myself this little garden of the universe is grown," unquote. If you want to be free, you can satisfy and please him. How to do that? Well, you can obey him. Nearly all the men of the world are fighting against that power, like little ants trying to pull down the Himalayas. A little ant, having drunk some toddy, meaning alcohol, becomes intoxicated and thinks it can pull down a mountain. In the same way, the whole world has become mad drinking the liquor of illusion. Sounds like a good title for an opera, doesn't it? Instead of the elixir of love, the liquor of illusion. Have to work on that. We take ourselves to be so great, whereas in reality we are zero, if not a minus sometimes. Now, of course, this is speaking of the self with a little s, the little egoic self. Yet we are always quarreling with God. I have lost something and I find fault with him. One whom I love dies and I blame him. I am not satisfied with his dispensation, and I feel that I could govern much better than he. Such is the attitude of all the men of the world toward that power. And of course, it's interesting, he says that he doesn't want to be a slave, and then what's the answer? To basically, to give in to the power of God. So you have to basically become a willing slave, you could say, to the power of the Lord. And of course, when you're doing it willingly, it's not slavery at all. When you do it out of love and devotion, it's bhakti yoga and karma yoga all rolled into one. It's like the difference between having to do a particular job that you don't particularly like and doing a job because somebody you love wants you to do that job. Then you do it willingly and lovingly and you enjoy doing it. But if you don't like your boss and the boss wants you to do something, even if you might enjoy it otherwise, you're going to not like it because you feel like you're being forced to do it. So love conquers all of these things, and so that's the beauty of the devotional path, is that you have to turn what would be slavery, what would seem like slavery, giving in to the will of something else, into working out of pure love and devotion. When, however, I have been able to understand that I am nothing, I go to him and say, "O God, take this body. It is not really mine, it is thine. Take this mind. It is not mine, it is thine. Take this soul. It is thine, not mine. Every day I am calling this body mine, but what do? I mix a little rice with soup and throw it into the mouth. But do I know to manufacture it into blood, bone, muscle, and tissue? Has any scientist ever been able to manufacture a drop of blood? Do I know how the food is digested, or how it is carried by the blood, or how the lungs breathe? Well, we know a few of those things now, but we certainly can't manufacture blood cells in that sense either. What are we doing is really the coolie's business, and there is an architect inside who directs all of our movements. When food is wanted, he makes it known in the form of hunger, and something solid I must get, if I beg, borrow, or steal. A little water is wanted, and he makes it known in the form of thirst, and I must find fresh water. And what do I get for it? I eat something, and the sense of refreshment again brings me a little pleasure. It is for that you are doing all this coolie's business. But know your own position. Know that you are only coolies obeying God's command. Then that madness, which is the cause of all miseries and which makes us forget God, or even say there is no God, will leave you. Then, when God sees you recognizing him as the master, he will become a most loving master. See, that's the key. You have to love the master, and the master will then love you and make all of the duties feel sweet. And of course, that's the way we try to spiritualize our lives. When we're eating food, we have to remember that Brahman is the ritual, and Brahman is the offering, and Brahman is the one who offers to the fire as Brahman. And that's why we repeat that before meals, is that we're recognizing that it's the power of Brahman inside us that is doing all of this, and that the food is from Brahman, and that Brahman is going to digest the food. Brahman is going to turn it into energy, and then Brahman is going to work through us. And so by remembering all of these things, it helps to spiritualize our existence. Almost all men of the world have usurped the throne where God should sit. On that throne where God should be, a most worthless slave has been given place. That is the ego. When you know this, then drive out the ego. When you do this and become the slave or servant of God, instead you will realize your eternal nature. Join yourself with God. Heretofore, you have been joining yourself with your wife, your children, your relatives, your friends. But when you will realize that God is your real relative, that He is your father, mother, friend, then you will go to Him. And as a relative of a Brahman must be a Brahman, so a relative of God must be God. Being one with God, all fear of death will go. Peace will come to you, and you will taste true anandam. So the moment you unite yourself with God, you will realize that you are Satchit Anandam, that eternal life, all knowledge, all bliss are yours. Now, so you see, it comes to the same point that one might be described as the Jnana Yogi path, and one that Swami Vivekananda certainly talked about a lot, where you affirm this idea that you are one with God, that you are that being in essence. And then, of course, he would also go on and describe the path of Bhakti Yoga as being a ways of realizing that. Because as Ramakrishnananda is going to go on here, the pure Jnani path is somewhat difficult. The path which I have been describing to you is the Bhakti Marga, but there is another, the path of discrimination, which is not altogether opposite to Bhakti. In this path, a person begins by discriminating what is eternal from what is non-eternal, and finds out that all is non-eternal in this universe. Then he asks, who am I? I am Mr. A or Mr. B. Mr. A and Mr. B must be born and must die, while I am not born and I do not die. Therefore, I cannot be Mr. A or Mr. B. Then he finds out, quote, since my body dies and is born, while I who am a dweller in the body am birthless and deathless, then I must be separate from the body and all these titles, that I am a Brahman, the son of Mr. So-and-so, that I am a man or a woman, rich or poor, cannot belong to me. Hence, this ego cannot be the same as myself. Am I then the mind? No. The body is an instrument in my hands, so is the mind. I am distinct from both body and mind. And of course, this reminds us of the scene in Alice in Wonderland where she meets the caterpillar. And the caterpillar keeps asking her who she is. And she tries to identify herself with her body, and that doesn't work. Then she tries to identify herself with her mind, and that doesn't work. So she's a bit confused at that point, and she doesn't come to the realization of exactly who she is at that time, because she hasn't woken up yet. So this is the situation we are in. We tend to identify ourselves with a name and a form, an occupation, talents, interests, and so forth. Age, gender, all of these things we tend to identify with. But in reality, all those things are quite temporary and not our true self. When the man who is following this path sits down to meditate, ideas come to him and he says, I am not these ideas, for they are inner phenomenon, in no way different from outer phenomenon, and I am beyond all phenomena. Then he gives up action of the legs. He closes all his indriyas, and he goes back to his mind. Here a very terrible struggle is before him. The mind, which has been pampered through millions and millions of births, will not be controlled. But where there is a will, there is a way. If he has determination and perseverance, in the end he will succeed. But it cannot be done in a day. He must have to practice persistently. Then he should have no desire for sensual enjoyments, because he had analyzed the whole universe and found it wanting. He must be beyond all enjoyments. And so you see, there's a way to combine these ideas. You can think that you are determined to realize your true self, but you realize that the ego is in the way, and so you pray devotionally to have the ego subdued. You pray devotionally to have the mind calmed, and so forth and so on. And you are lovingly grateful to the teachers that have taught you these truths. And so just because somebody might be following a path of jnana does not mean that they are devoid of bhakti at all. In fact, I've seen many examples of that, of people that come off as sounding like jnanis, but when you get to know them, you find out how supremely devoted they are to Vivekananda and Ramakrishna and their guru and so forth. This is the other path, but in this a person must struggle alone. Therefore, Sri Krishna says, a man must meet all sorts of perils in this path, so it is better to take refuge in me. If an ignorant man tries to drive an engine, you know how dangerous it is. So say to God, I do not know how to run this engine. Please, God, do thou do it for me. Why should you try to run this machine of a body when you can place it in the hands of a perfect driver? Let God drive the engine. Say, Lord, I am incapable of running this body and mind. Do thou do it for me. Come and occupy the vacant throne in my heart. I will never again pollute it by my presence, meaning the little self, the ego. Do thou take it, Lord. When a man can thus surrender himself completely at the feet of the Lord, then God steadily leads him to the land of bliss. Now that ends that section. The next one, there's going to be a paragraph or two that is pretty much a repeat of the idea of not being the body and the mind and the senses and the organs of action and so forth, so I may skip over some of that. But it's going to start with some quotes here. The first one is from Sri Ramakrishna. One can taste devotion and love of God only through his incarnations. Infinite are the ways of God's play, but what I need is love and devotion. I want only the milk. The milk comes through the udder of the cow. The incarnation is the udder. The title that this is prefacing is Why Divine Incarnations. And then Swami Vivekananda says, the theory of incarnation is the first link in the chain of ideas leading to the recognition of the oneness of God and man. So, chapter 12, Why Divine Incarnations. If you analyze the universe, you will find that it is made up of 5 things: sounds, forms, tastes, touches, and senses, and smells. When you look at a table, you see that it has a particular form, that it is hard, that the wood of which it is made has a peculiar odor, and so on. In the same way, the sun has a particular form which it differentiates it from everything else. Can you imagine a formless sun? Now, all these 5 elements are dependent upon what? Upon the senses. If you had no eyes, forms could not exist for you. If you had no ears, sounds would not exist for you. Without a tongue, there would be no taste for you, and without a nose, you would not perceive odors. If then this universe is made up, as we said, of 5 things, of innumerable forms, innumerable sounds, innumerable tastes, touches, and smells, and if these are dependent upon the 5 senses, then the universe cannot exist independent of the senses. And so now he's going to go on again about how the senses are perceiving things outside. They're not us. They're merely our instruments, just like a telescope. He gives an analogy of an astronomer and his telescope. The astronomer is not his telescope, just as we are not our sense organs. And then he goes into the idea of sleep again, and how all these things leave you in your sleep. And then it comes to the same conclusion. If we wish to know the real man, we must not look for him in the body. We must go beyond the body and the senses. He must even go beyond the mind. Then, if he is beyond the body and the senses, he must be formless. What is the definition of form? Well, what do you learn in your geometry? Form is something which is denned by lines, is it not? So we usually believe that a man is 3.5 cubits in length, that he is stout or thin, etc. But the real man, as I have just told you, is beyond all these. We must never identify the astronomer with the telescope. He may have a body, but the body is limited, and he is not. Mind also is limited. You may know many things, but there are many more things you do not know. If you compare what you know with what you do not know, what you know appears insignificant. Wherever there is mind, there is knowledge. If you are unmindful at the present moment, you will not know what I am saying. But mind cannot go everywhere. It may travel around the earth, but it will not be able to go to the countless stars and planets that fill space. Therefore, since it cannot go everywhere, it cannot know everything, and so it must be limited. So again, just arguments to show us that our true nature is really the infinite, and anything that we are perceiving or experiencing or knowing in our limited sense is obviously limited. But you are distinct from the body and the mind, hence you must be formless and unlimited. That real self of man is God. He is the Father, He is the Mother, He is the only one existence out of which all phenomenal forms have come into being. If He goes away, the universe will cease to exist, just as when you go away from the mind in sleep. So, He is the real self with a capital S. But although He is our real self, it is not very easy to go to Him. We learn this from analysis. To realize it, however, is very difficult, the most difficult thing in the world. Therefore, this knowledge comes only to 1 in millions. I have already pointed out to you how very difficult it is to go inside. It is natural for us to go outside. It is easy for us to see forms, to hear sounds, to touch, taste, and smell. But we must struggle hard to turn to go inside. Therefore, because it is more natural for us to go outside, and since we must go inside to realize God, it is very hard for anybody to reach the feet of the Lord. When sleep comes, it is easy enough for man to go beyond the senses and the mind, but to do it voluntarily is, as we have seen, the most difficult thing. When you sit down to meditate, even if you are able to go away from the senses, your mind will be restless. You will not be able to hold it still even for a moment. You will find yourself its slave. You will be at the mercy of this restless, wayward mind. If, however, God can give us all we want, then it is most desirable that we should go to him. No king can give you all that you want. He may be very powerful, but he cannot save you from disease or death. No man in this world can do that for you. Yet you wish to live. You wish to be healthy. He who can save you from death and disease must be a savior. Where to find such a savior? To find him, you must go beyond the mind and the senses. Now, of course, we also know that God is not going to make us all healthy and make us live forever, but it removes the fear of death and it removes the fear of disease. These are the things it removes. It doesn't, and that's just the death and the disease of the body. As soon as you can disidentify yourself from the body and the mind, then the true you is free from death and disease. But the body and the mind are not necessarily going to be free from death and disease. So we have to understand what is being meant here. And of course, we've also probably experienced that when we finally achieve a bit of restfulness of the mind, it's very easy for the mind to fall into sleep, because that's the natural state our mind finds itself in when it is completely restful. It's the state of sleep. And so somehow we have to conquer that switch in us. That's when we still the waves of the mind and allow the mind to become peaceful, that it doesn't slip into sound sleep. And of course, that's the function of the repeating a mantra. If you repeat the mantra, that keeps the mind in some sense active, but active in a very specific way, repeating a sound, mentally repeating a sound phrase which has the vibration which resonates with that divine self within you. And so by repeating the mantra, we can hold the mind steady and in a state of restfulness, but also resonating with the divine energy that is within us. Otherwise, if you try to just still the waves of the mind and make it blank, you're very apt to just fall asleep, because that's what a blank mind seems to be to us most of the time. God, in his infinite love, wants to make you happy and healthy. For this reason, you call him Father, Mother, Friend. Yet we find it impossible to go to him. But he has such infinite love that he comes to us. Yet, just as a blind man cannot see the forms about him, so we do not see God. He has come to us in the form of our mothers and fathers, in the forms of our teachers, and in the forms of our shastras, but especially in the form of the avatars, or the incarnations, which was the whole point of the topic of this chapter, was why a divine incarnation? Well, because the divine incarnation is the one that's going to teach us how to achieve these things. And we have just a few minutes, so we'll begin the next chapter, which is how to distinguish an incarnation of God. What is the necessity of divine incarnation? God is infinite. He is absolutely one and unlimited. Then why should he incarnate at all? When he is limitless, how can he confine himself in a form which is limited? Well, of course, I'll venture an answer before we find out his answer. There's nothing to grab onto in the infinite, and we are experiencing ourselves as a finite being. We're not really, but that's the way we experience ourselves. And our mind has certain limitations, and so it has to grasp on to something that has some sort of a finite form to it. Otherwise, it's like trying to grab an infinitely sized beach ball. It will just slip away because you can't wrap your hands around enough of it to embrace the spherical nature of the ball because it's an infinite ball. So the incarnation has to come so that there's something to grab onto. And so this is my particular answer, but let's see what he says. This human body is a peculiar thing. It seems to be only 3.5 cubits in length, whereas in reality is unlimited. For what is a living body? It is a conscious entity. Without this consciousness, the body would be as dull, as dead, and unconscious as is any dead object. So consciousness alone gives value to it. Otherwise, it is absolutely worthless. A living body, therefore, means nothing. It means not only the body, but consciousness as well. Now, this consciousness, which shines through the 5 organs of senses and through the 5 organs of action and through yourself, is inside the body, not outside. If you stick a knife into your body, you feel pain. But if you put it somewhere else, is there any sensation of pain? This shows that the seat of consciousness is inside the body. Now, of course, someone like Sri Ramakrishna, his consciousness expanded everywhere. And so there were occasions when he did feel the pain outside of his body, as when somebody was walking on the grass, he could feel that pain. Everyone imagines that when he is sleeping, he is unconscious. But this is not a fact. When a man is awake, he is conscious. In dream, he is also conscious. So, in the wakeful as well as in the dream condition, he is conscious. When he sleeps soundly, however, he thinks that he is unconscious. But this is not so. If you can remember a thing you have been conscious of, you must have been conscious of it when you experienced it. Memory always means recalling a past experience. If then, when you wake up, you remember that you had been in sound sleep, that proves that you are conscious, that you are able to recall the experience of sleep shows that there was consciousness at that time. I do too. The audience has just commented that they disagree with that. Yes, I don't see that you think you've slept soundly because you don't remember anything. That's the way I see it. But this is the standard textbook explanation that he's giving. That is how it's always put. But I must admit I don't find that a very satisfying argument. That you are able to recall the experience of sleep shows that there was consciousness at that time. When a man experiences the absence of all sensations, perceptions, etc., that is what we call sleep. But consciousness is still there, nor is the man outside the body. In 3 conditions of sleep, dream, and waking, the man is always inside the body, and in all 3 consciousness is there intact. From birth to death, it is always present in a living person. But the mind is not there, and the senses are not there in deep sleep. If a man takes your book away at that time, you do not know it. Only when you wake up do you see that it is gone, which shows that your power of perceptions were absent. Now, I'll certainly agree that the essence of consciousness has to be there. Your Atman is still there. Only rarely does somebody's soul disentangle itself from the body during deep sleep. And when they have the experience of leaving their body, that's not a common occurrence. Although it's interesting to know that occasionally there's some people that have those kinds of experiences fairly regularly. But out-of-body experiences is not the norm. And most people do not experience out-of-body experiences during deep sleep. So their consciousness in that sense is in there. It's just that to say that you're conscious of it is, I think, a bit a misuse of the word conscious. Throughout the whole lifetime of a man, therefore, consciousness is present. Mind does not always exist. Senses do not always exist. Body does not always exist, but consciousness always exists. It is consciousness that enlivens the senses and the mind. It is consciousness which enables the senses to perceive and sense all things. Now, this consciousness, which is distinct and separate from the senses and the mind, has the power not to be confined by the mind or the senses or the body. When it is not confined by these, it is in its liberated condition, unconfined. This consciousness is therefore really limitless, and we can make this out in sound sleep, for at that time it has separated itself from the body and mind, and so is unconfined. See, I'm not sure that's always the case, but anyway, who am I to argue with him? It must exist inside the body. Well, then he's saying it must exist inside the body. It can never be outside, so this isn't making much sense here. How can it be separated from the body and the mind, and yet it's still inside but not outside? His terminology, I think, is not terribly precise here. It can never be outside, for the moment it goes outside, the man drops down dead. And again, I'm not quite sure that's always the case, because people do have the experience of having out-of-body experiences. And we certainly know that in near-death experiences that happens. Now, you might argue that the body is dead during a near-death experience, and their consciousness is certainly separated from it. So, again, these definitions become fuzzy at best. Now, consciousness, being infinite and unlimited, and being also an essential part of man, then man must be finite and infinite at the same time. He is finite as regards his body, and he is finite as regards his mind, and he is finite as regards his ego, but he is infinite as regards his consciousness. It is therefore possible for him to be finite and infinite at the same time. How much more must it be possible for God? All right, so we will have to conclude there, and you're going to have to wait 2 weeks for the further explanation of this, because next week I will be in Tempe, which is the suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, doing a 3-day seminar. So I won't be here, and so there will be a night off. You get a Friday night off. Yeah. 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 Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace. Yeah, wasn't it Shankar or somebody who managed to be in 2 places at once or something?